This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate third and final part of What If Naruto Was Hinata's Wild Pet. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Ordinarily, nobody would be able to bear to watch Naruto gobble up ramen like a man who hasn't eaten in weeks. Those who were unfortunate enough to see him were repulsed by the way the noodles and broth entered his mouth. But now he was being watched by a crowd as he consumed 6 bowls of ramen in record time. He didn't know what their issue was, but he wasn't going to whine as long as he got his ramen. Hinata rubbed her eyes once more, wondering if she was still dreaming because she simply couldn't believe what she was seeing. Naruto could not possibly get back to his normal self. Correct. He paused and gazed at his audience, finishing his 6th bowl before Hinata could open her eyes again. Without saying a word or producing any sound, he simply stared and blinked. He felt strange when his eyes first fell on the teal ones. The red-haired boy seemed to want to say something but was unable to find the right words. Nothing was any less awkward because of the expression in his eyes. Was that sympathy? His eyes darted to the lone woman in the vicinity. If he recalled correctly, her name was Hinata, but he wasn't sure. Of the two, she made him feel the strangest. She looked disoriented and perplexed, searching his eyes for the solution she sought. She was a dark, strange girl who took the same classes as him at the academy, but that was all he knew about her. She was a dark, enigmatic oddball now, and Naruto hoped she wasn't as insane as Sasuke's fangirls. He didn't know what to think when he first woke up. The last he recalled, he was lounging beneath the shade of a rather large tree, attempting to block out the villagers' glares and hatred, when a shadowy figure suddenly materialized in front of him and placed a bag over his head. After that, everything, he drew nothing. He eventually caught up with Hinata after reorienting himself, and she escorted him to some jonin. Although the man appeared to know Naruto was unable to say the same about him. The lengthy and uncomfortable walk home was made worse by the Jonin's constant attempts to tell him about everything that had happened over the previous 24 hours. Perhaps the Jonin wasn't yet mentally capable of managing a genin team, Naruto thought. Naruto maintained a smile despite the awkwardness, and it only got bigger when he saw Konoha's enormous walls. At last, he could leave the strange people who insisted on being on his team. How was he supposed to believe that, for heaven's sake, he was only 9? Even so, he became aware that his body felt different, a little taller, a little stronger, but otherwise, he was essentially the same. He asked politely, "So are you guys going to join in or what?" Gaara and Hinata blinked, glanced down, and saw that their ramen had arrived, just a few minutes earlier, to be exact. The food wasn't particularly hot, but it wasn't cold either. Before starting to eat, Gaara gazed at his bowl for 10 more seconds. Hinata ignored it and pushed it away without thinking twice. "Hey, you shouldn't." Hinata shoved the ramen in front of him before he could finish. Even though he didn't believe it, she knew him very well. Unaware that she was staring at him once more, he ate her ramen without question. Gaara uttered the word, "Naruto," barely audible above a whisper. Mid-bite, Naruto looked up from his bowl. He waited for the redhead to go on, blinking. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen." Naruto simply cocked his head in confusion. The redhead had said nothing to him, or to anyone, really, and the first words he heard left him completely perplexed. "For what? What happened?" In response, he said, "I had no intentions of blasting you with my Biju bomb, or doing this to you," with a sinister tone. Naruto was limited to blinking. Biju bomb. What? Whatever Hinata was about to say, Naruto.kun died in her throat. She lacked the bravery to say anything more. She closed her eyes as though to block out the outside world, then got up, said she was sorry, and fled. Naruto stared at the last place she saw her before turning back to Gaara as he watched her leave. The Jinchuriki had no idea how bad this was, but he knew his female teammate wouldn't take it well. Hell, he still didn't fully understand. Before consuming more ramen, he questioned, "So what's wrong with her? Did someone die?" Gaara stood up too, just shaking his head. Without providing an explanation for his ambiguous response, he simply said, "For her sake, I hope not," and left. Naruto didn't bother to watch him leave. After finishing Hinata's bowl of ramen, he gazed at it, lost in his reflections on what had just happened. "Hey old man, more ramen." It was clear that something was interfering with his hearing, so Naruto inserted his right pinky into his ear to clear the debris out of it. Yamato, this Jonin, could never have declared that he would fight him, did he? "Okay, I think I got everything out. Now what was that about fighting?" Yamato let out a sigh. "Well, according to your doctor, you are perfectly healthy. Whatever happened back in Taki didn't negatively impact your body, so you should be fine, physically speaking. With that being said, Lord Hokage wants to know if you're capable of retaining your rank. Naruto blinked. What rank? I'm still in the academy. Yamato merely rubbed his temples in response. Yamato tried to sound patient, but the boy was making it difficult. We went over this already, Naruto. You're really a genin. You passed the graduation in my own test months ago, Yamato said. Yeah, right. With a more menacing expression on his face, Yamato said, regardless of what you think, you and I are going to spar. Got it? Naruto swallowed and gave a dutiful nod. Yamato nodded and grinned. Then let's begin. Naruto's blood ran cold, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he could practically hear his instincts telling him to get up. Choosing to trust his instincts, he leapt back in time to avoid being trapped by wood columns that rose from the ground. Regretfully, Yamato's body still had the strength it had prior to his transformation. Unfortunately for Naruto, he was unaware of his physical prowess. He was unable to adapt his body to his movements as he flew back. He fell up until he struck a tree belly, first after his legs struck the ground. He held his stomach in an attempt to lessen the pain while pausing to catch his breath. Once more, his instincts urged him to move, and he defied his body's wishes by pushing himself up and leaping away as kunai and shuriken charged at him. Plunging into the eyes of the madman. Sparring with him, he gasped for air. Naruto was too preoccupied avoiding more wooden columns that were attempting to capture him to have the opportunity to yell at the older ninja as he would have liked. Yamato observed intently as Naruto leapt to the left and right, avoiding his columns. He was impressed, he had to admit. He was just following his instincts, and he didn't think Naruto knew what he was doing. However, he continued to avoid him, just as he had done prior to his transformation. Although he wasn't as elegant or cautious in his approach, Naruto was still quite competent given his situation. Yamato decided to step it up and doubled his efforts on the wooden columns, adding even more fun. Even his demonic side wasn't cunning enough to evade capture, so it wouldn't take long to catch him now. When the columns accelerated and more appeared out of the ground, Naruto realized he was in serious trouble. Before long, he was hoisted high off the ground and placed inside a wooden cage. Yamato stopped suddenly and squinted while saying, "Well, I can't say I'm not impressed now." Something didn't feel quite right. His suspicions were confirmed when Naruto descended and the wooden cage's bottom burned. With flames consuming both arms, Naruto quickly closed the distance between himself and Yamato without missing a beat. He swung his right arm forward and gave a loud battle cry. Yamato dodged just in time to stop a kick that would have sent him flying. Naruto overcame Yamato's defenses by spinning on his right heel and slamming his left fist into his stomach. Yamato stooped in agony, allowing Naruto to get another chance. Before Yamato broke into pieces and splinters of wood, Naruto sent his sensei flying with a forceful knee to the face. Naruto had never seen that before, and his eyes widened. As soon as he sensed his intuition, Yamato approached from behind and, before the blonde could blink, pressed the edge of his kunai against Naruto's throat. "I think this spar is over," said Yamato coolly. After slowly turning his head, Naruto gave the older man a scowl. Naruto turned to face Yamato, swung his head back, and struck him in the chest. Yamato winced but only took a step back, not much more. That was sufficient for Naruto, who replaced himself with a log and charged at the man while facing away. As he leapt and was instantly over Yamato, prepared to give him his all in a single blow, a cunning grin adorned his face. When Yamato just ducked, he gasped in surprise. Naruto slammed his fist into the ground right in front of Yamato, but it was too late. But when the hit resulted in an explosion, both were taken aback. Naruto wasn't as fortunate as Yamato, who was able to substitute himself at the last minute. The blonde's unconscious body was seen by Yamato flying away from the explosion. Using the body flicker technique, he quickly moved into the blonde's path, caught him, and then struck the merciless earth. A sharp pain shot through his body, making him wince, but he chose to ignore it as he landed gracefully and set Naruto down. When he eventually saw the fire encircling Naruto, his eyes nearly burst. He was all right. His clothes were slightly burned, but not him, and his skin was unblemished. Having seen it all, Hinata and Gaara could only gaze in silent wonder at the strangeness that was their teammate. Yamato sighed and then grinned. Well, that could have gone better, indeed. With a smile that never wavered, Yamato turned to face his other pupil and asked, "So, Yamato. Sensei, what happens now? When he wakes up, we're getting back to work." Getting used to the new Naruto didn't take long for Team 7. The team had returned to carrying out missions after a few days of retraining him on some of the things he already knew, such as how to create shadow clones and enhance his chakra control. For some reason, Naruto seemed to be able to complete the tiresome D-rank missions more easily by using his clones and doing more work. The fact that this Naruto appeared more level-headed was more significant than the fact that the previous Naruto was lazy. Months passed, and before long, the Chunin exams were approaching. Now, as he watched his Jonin friends offer their green genin to take the tests, Yamato couldn't help but sigh. "Yamato," Jonin said, standing up straight and berating himself in his head for becoming distracted. "Yes, Lord Hokage," Yamato blinked and asked, "What is on your mind?" He paused, frowning, and said, "Well, sir, I don't think any of this year's graduates are ready for the exams. I'm not trying to say they don't have the skills to pass the exams, far from it. However, I feel that maybe they should wait another year, like Guy did with his students." Guy awoke at the sound of his name and greeted the user with a thumbs up. "I applaud your honesty and agree with your logic wholeheartedly. I held my students back a year so they could have experience to back up their youthful skills." Yamato nodded toward Guy and forced a smile. Hiruzen muttered, "I see," into his hands in front of his mouth. He questioned, "Does that change anyone else's mind?" But Kurenai, Asuma, and Kakashi remained unmoved. After a brief pause, Yamato nodded his head and said, "So, I can safely assume you are going to keep your students from taking these exams, Yamato? I would like to wait for the next Chunin exams, at the very least, but I would like to ask for a C-rank mission." "All right. If that's all, come get the forms your students need to fill out before the exam. Kakashi, Asuma, and Kurenai. The others are dismissed." Naruto sighed as he looked up at his room's ceiling. Living with the Hyugas was strange, especially since he didn't know many of them. However, he had a vague feeling of familiarity when he saw Hinata, her younger sister, and her father. Although he kept to himself most of the time, the older male would occasionally drop by to check on the blonde, and he liked the man. However, Hinata was just plain strange. She used to be strange because, if her red face was any indication, she would always feel nauseous around him, faint, and stutter a lot. Now, she was strange because, although she was pleasant and kind to him, she was also aloof and... It wasn't that she didn't care, but whenever she did something for him, she would occasionally act aloof or try to appear that way, as if she was worried that he would hurt her or would hurt her again. Which was absurd in hindsight because he had never hurt her before. He had a mission to go to in the morning, something about an escort mission to some distant land, but he didn't remember, he wasn't really paying attention, and he was too excited about finally leaving Konoha. He's never really left Konoha, so he was ecstatic about what life outside the walls of Konoha looked like. Naruto shook his head, trying to clear his mind so he could go to sleep. A smirk crossed his face as he turned on his side and his mind imagined the dangers and excitement that awaited him. When his alarm clock went off, Naruto was already up and ready to begin the mission. He had everything packed and ready to go by his door, and he left his room at the same time as Hinata. He grinned at her, relieved that he wasn't the only one who got up early, and she gave him a half-hearted smile before heading down the hall, while Naruto stared at her back with a look of bewilderment on his face. "Uzumaki," Naruto said, turning to face the direction that had called his name, but the head of the Hyuga clan bowed low to greet him. "Good morning, Lord Hyuga. I see you are leaving for your mission to the Land of Iron." After straightening up, Naruto enthusiastically nodded. "Yeah, I can't wait to leave Konoha for good." Heishi nodded in understanding as he paused, trying to think of the right words to say. "Not that I ever want to leave my home, but..." "Don't worry, I get what you're saying," Heishi said. "Please, try not to get killed," and started to leave. "Hold on, Lord Hyuga. What's wrong with Hinata?" he asked, pointing a thumb in Hinata's direction when he noticed he had the man's attention. "She appears to be a little out of it." As he considered what Naruto had said, Heishi scowled a little. "I am not positive. If I were you, Uzumaki, I would confront her about it, but I think she's trying to deal with the possibility that she may have lost a close friend for a long time, possibly for the rest of her life," Naruto said, raising an eyebrow without saying anything. "But shouldn't you be the one to inquire since you're her father?" "Even though I am her father, she cannot benefit from me. She can only get assistance from one person." "All right, so where is this individual?" "No one is aware. But don't be discouraged, I'm sure if anyone can help her, aside from the one I mentioned, it would be you," Heishi said, closing his office door without saying another word. Naruto pondered Hiashi's words as he made his way to the main gates, so engrossed in his thoughts that he failed to notice Hinata following him. He turned to face Hinata, who blushed slightly at the intensity of his gaze but said nothing, knowing him well enough to know that he was about to speak. He opened his mouth, but it took him a long time to actually say anything. "Are you okay?" he surprised the young Hyuga by asking. "Yes, I am." "Why are you asking?" She looked away as he responded, "Well, you just seem sort of distant. It's kind of weird that you're like that considering that we've been on the same team for months now." Naruto sighed as he followed her, knowing deep down that things would only get worse before they got better. "I'm sorry, Naruto," she said, looking up with her eyes closed and a fake smile on her face. "I'll try to be less distant from now on," she said without waiting for a response. A man with long white hair sneezed off somewhere close to the land of iron. "Oh no. You're repulsive." The man blinked, shrugged his shoulders, and took another sip of his sake as the scantily clad woman on his lap screamed as she went to the bathroom. "Ah, waitress, more sake, please." As the waitress approached him, he began to sing. The sun appeared to be warmer and brighter than normal. It wasn't as if it was abnormal, but for some reason, it was something that was pestering the blonde-haired genin. Naruto wasn't sure if it was just because he was out of his comfort zone or just simply because of the awkward silence shared between his team as they escorted some newlyweds back to their home in the land of iron. Currently, he followed closely behind his female teammate, with his red-haired teammate walking in step beside him and the sometimes scary Jonin sensei while the couple walked in the middle of the group. Naruto stared down at his current outfit with slight disapproval. Because of some incident his sensei has neglected to inform him of, all of his orange-themed clothing were destroyed in some sort of fire, which was bullshit, but it wasn't as if he had proof. Instead, he wore a plain black jacket, an orange shirt, black slacks and matching ninja shoes. It didn't look too dreadful but it did lack that popping trait that only his favorite colors seemed to provide. Gaara and Yamato insisted that he limit the amount of orange he wore. Though reluctant, he agreed, mostly because they were buying and he'd rather spend his funds on something more important, i.e. ramen and instant ramen. When Naruto looked up at the tingling sensation of eyes on him, he saw Hinata glancing at him again, and despite the confused feelings bubbling up in the back of his head, he pushed past them and raised an eyebrow at the strange girl, who blushed and gave an unconvincing smile to cover her discomfort and embarrassment. Naruto wanted to say something, anything at all, but every time he opened his mouth, he blanked out and usually just spouts out whatever was on his mind. "Is it warmer than normal? And brighter, too?" he asked with a foolish smile. Warmer than. If he hadn't known that it would only make things more awkward, he would have called in a clone to kick himself. Hinata blinked at him and said, "It's almost like the sun is angry today." He laughed too loudly after saying that. "For heaven's sake, man, stop talking. Uzumaki, please stop talking." Yamato and Naruto gave Gaara a strange look when he said, "Your comment on the weather is making me wish I had taken the brunt force of the Biju bomb." Hinata simply turned her head away, the memory of that day reopening old wounds. A good amount of time had passed since that day, and she should be better, not still depressed. "Gaara, no one asked you, I don't need to be asked anything to speak, moron. Then have a conversation with someone who is interested in you. Anyone?" Naruto looked around as he waited for someone to say something. Gaara simply glared at his idiot teammate. Surprise, surprise. Enough. The two men were silenced by Yamato's loud voice. "You're both giving me a migraine." If he hadn't been too busy massaging the area between his eyes, he probably would have given them the look. "Not that it's a huge deal or anything, but how much longer until we get home?" A voice said, breaking the silence. As his wife partially concealed herself behind him, the male civilian inquired. These were odd individuals, made even stranger by their ninja heritage. "We'll get there when we get there, got it?" Yamato was not in the mood to deal with the newlyweds, so he leveled them both with his look. If he didn't care about maintaining his composure, he would laugh at their faces. Excellent. Yamato let go of the tension in his body after ensuring that no one was speaking anymore, and he sighed. 2 more days and he would be able to finally get some much-needed rest. "I swear to God that I will kick your ass if you touch me with your dumb sand again," Naruto screamed as loudly as he could. With a defiant grin, Gaara said, "I'd like to see you try." There are only 2 days left. They had finally arrived in the land of iron earlier that day and dropped the newlyweds off at their new home without incident. Mission accomplished. In the morning, they would eat breakfast and return to the Leaf Village in time for the Chunin exams, while Naruto looked up at the ceiling with little to no interest as his roommates slept soundly and deeply. It was only 2 in the morning, but it felt like Naruto had been in bed for 4 years. He looked back at the ceiling and allowed his thoughts to wander once more, and again, all he could think about was the lavender-eyed girl who slept just 1 room away. Occasionally, he would get memories of them, together, and happy. It was the kind of happiness he'd always desired, to be valued and accepted, to be acknowledged and cared for. It warmed his heart to know that he was the object of such feelings and attention. But as soon as he realized that all of that love and care was for him and that he wasn't the one to whom Hinata hugged, smiled those unique smiles, or confided her secrets, hopes, and dreams, despair would always set in. He was a stranger disguised as her beloved Naruto, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and this wasn't the Naruto she knew or, most likely, the one she wanted. He clenched his hands tightly, causing the sheets beneath them to wrinkle. He had never been accepted or loved, so what was so different now? Why was she so special? Why does he care so much about her even though he doesn't know her well? Why was it so painful? Morning couldn't come soon enough, so he turned to his side and closed his eyes, ignoring the tears in his eyes. Phew. I'm excited to get home. With his hands behind his head, Naruto exclaimed with excitement, and as he and his group made their way to the village's exit, Hinata couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm and nod in agreement. Are you already homesick? But I assumed you were content to go? Naruto hummed briefly before turning to face his teacher as Yamato teased his pupil. Yamato. Sensei, I was, but I'm just happy to be returning home now. When he said, no one makes ramen like Ichiraku's ramen does, he flashed his famously silly smile, and his team all started to perspire. Only, right, Yamato could say. Rolling his eyes, Gaara asked, why am I not surprised? Panda, you say something? Gaara glared at Naruto as he snarled with his ground teeth. You idiot, I told you not to call me that, he snapped back. Naruto grinned. Sand slowly emerged from nowhere and started to circle Naruto. I don't seem to recall, he shot back sharply. Then allow me to refresh your memory. Is it really possible for you two to go a day without attempting to murder one another? Holding his face in his hands, Yamato cried out in frustration. Naruto and Gaara blinked at him and then at one another before Naruto turned away and shrugged. When Gaara smirked and said, I knew you were always a scaredy cat, Naruto halted and stepped forward to face him, his cerulean eyes blazing with rage and the promise of excruciating pain. You know what? Hey! A voice called out and Team 7 faced the direction of the voice to see it was the unremarkably average man they escorted to the land of iron. The team waited as he ran up to them and even for him to catch his breath. I need your services, once more, he exclaimed, and Yamato arched an eyebrow. And for what purpose do you require us? The man looked directly into Yamato's eyes and answered in his most frantic voice. My spouse. She informed me that yesterday at the hot springs, she noticed someone watching her. We need you to identify the culprit and put an immediate stop to them. That's a pretty tall order, Naruto said, whistling, and Yamato considered the request, realizing that he should at least inform the Hokage of the side mission. It's a start, the Jonin said casually as he pocketed the money. All right team, let's go find us a peeping Tom. Yamato nodded, holding out a hand expectantly, but it wasn't like the Hokage needed to know about it right now. The man stared at it absently for a while before scowling and coughing up a good amount of change. The sun was just a few minutes from setting, but the lack of light had no effect on Hinata's mission. She could see everything well enough. She leapt to the tallest tree that stood closest to the hot springs, and her Byakugan came to life as her perception increased exponentially. She scanned the area around her, her eyes moving subconsciously at every movement she saw. Naruto leapt to the branch beneath and to the left of her, watching her work, and every time she used her special abilities, he couldn't help but gawk. The sight of the veins around her eyes fascinated him so much that Hinata blinked and turned her head and eyes to face Naruto, even though she could see him without having to. They stared at each other for a moment before reality set in and they turned away, both of them flushed. He hadn't intended to stare, but damn, the Byakugan was so awesome. Hey, Naruto said in a low voice, but he knew Hinata heard him because she always seemed to be paying attention. Let's do our best. He smiled at her with his most genuine, self-assured smile, and although Hinata's blush never went away, she nodded and returned his smile, which pleased him because she was usually cold and emotionless around him. Suddenly, she scowled and shifted her focus to the hot springs. Naruto followed her gaze and squinted when he noticed, something white? White fur? Holy crap, he hoped it wasn't an animal because it was enormous. We found him, Hinata said with assurance in a whisper. Got it, Naruto replied humbly, even though they knew they didn't need to whisper because they were only 10 meters away. Call Panda and Pinocchio. The target is in sight, they said. Participate? Hold on. The target has a large chakra reserve, the Hyuga yelled. It is nearly as big as the Hokage. Shish. What took place? From the headset came Yamato's static voice. The target's chakra is at the cage level. How do we proceed? Quiet. Fucked. Uncertain of how to interpret the response, Hinata and Naruto blinked. What? I apologize. Don't interact. I'm coming. He's where? At the hot spring's southernmost point. He is blending in with the background by employing some kind of technique. Sit tight and wait for Gaara. Roger. Then circle around and surround him, ready to ambush him with kunai. Naruto and Hinata nodded, though he was unable to see it. Soon after, Gaara appeared, and they took their positions, watching as best they could as Yamato ran through hand signs and circled around the peeping Tom before touching the tree the perp was on and manipulating it to wrap a thick branch around him and hold him in place. Knowing that he would not be able to escape his makeshift cuffs, the man broke the branch he was on free from the tree and fled, but he refused to disclose his location even after being apprehended. Oh no, you don't. As he leapt from his position and made his way to the moving branch, Naruto yelled, "Take this, you old pervert." Naruto readied his right foot for an axe kick. The peeping Tom stopped and was about to jump away if it wasn't for the wood that sprang up from the ground and the sand that reinforced the wood. He looked up in time for Naruto's heel to drive his head back down. Uzumaki smackdown. After the hit, the man's long, white hair flowed up as he fell to the ground, ending the camouflage technique. Gosh, that hurt. When he felt open air pass over the wound over his head, he cried out and flinched. This is not good. Team 7 glanced at Yamato and blinked in perplexity. What's bad? Gaara inquired irritably. This, my young genin, is none other than the Toad Sage. Jiraiya of the Sannin, Yamato said, letting out a sigh and stopping his technique, thereby releasing the pervert. Jiraiya glared at the four-leaf village ninja in front of him, but the gauze covering his face made the glare less effective, making him appear like a Halloween mummy with a shabby outfit. The only people who looked down or away from the enraged Sannin were Yamato and Hinata, who were a little ashamed of attacking the man without fully understanding who they were up against. Nevertheless, Yamato couldn't help but be proud of his team's handling of the unidentified threat. Despite his displeasure with Naruto's reckless attack, he managed to deliver a powerful kick to Jiraiya, a cage-level ninja, in the end, because of his training and teamwork, and that must have meant something. Yamato proceeded to bow low after saying, on behalf of Team 7, I apologize once more for the misunderstanding, Master Jiraiya. Jiraiya glanced subtly at the blonde genin while nodding in his general direction. He glared at him with pure anger and disgust, as did his red-haired teammate. With his arms folded across his chest, Gaara said, save your breath, Yamato. Sensei, this man may be a Sannin, but he's nothing more than a shameless pervert. Yeah, pervy. Sage. Gaara grinned and even laughed a little at what his teammate had said. In Jiraiya's forehead, a tick began to grow. He approached the two and leaned down to meet their eyes, glaring at them menacingly. When they looked back at the Sannin without blinking, he was impressed. I'll give them credit for being brave little shits. Jiraiya tried to suppress a smirk as she thought. As old memories started to come back to him, he looked at Naruto for a little longer. I would have died of heartbreak at the sudden realization if I hadn't already known he was her child. He focused all of his attention on the blonde menace, pushing aside old memories and emotions. Jiraiya's lips formed a menacing grin, which made Naruto uneasy. In his most intimidating tone, Jiraiya said, you have a lot of nerve calling me that to my face, brat. Give me one good reason I, Sannin, shouldn't send you back to the Leaf Village via punt. For fun, he even directed a fair amount of murderous intent at the boy. Hopefully, he doesn't wed himself and continues his parents' legacy. Gaara's helpful response, big talk coming from the Sannin that lost first blood to a genin, caused his friend to nod and express gratitude. Jiraiya's embarrassed expression from Gaara's statement nearly made both boys laugh. Gaara, however, nearly did. Bahahaha. Burn. That's 2 for the genin from Konoha. Zip for pervy. Sage. Naruto then started to march in a circle while he dreadfully mimicked a cheering crowd. Jiraiya arched her right eyebrow. The child was going to die tonight, so screw his heritage. Yamato let out a sigh. With the exception of the Hyuga heiress, Jiraiya was certain to slaughter the entire team. Not even a Sannin can make you two behave. He was still not annoyed by her. Hinata gently reprimanded them. Naruto, Gaara, please, we should respect Master Jiraiya. He has done so much for our village, was their buzzkill. Jiraiya smiled at the young woman at that point. She was undoubtedly his favorite heiress. Hinata blinked at him and felt her heart skip a beat. Ah, come on, Nada. she said. She could almost feel her heart giving out on her as memories and feelings from the previous encounter with the other Naruto came flooding back to the forefront of her mind. Her face turned red with embarrassment, and she started to poke her index fingers together, going back to her old habits for comfort. Stuttering, she said, well. Yamato caught the other four's attention with a clap. He paused and gave the two men on his team a sharp, level glare before turning to Jiraiya and grinning strangely. Now that the unpleasantries have been taken care of, he said, will you join us for dinner, Master Jiraiya? It's on our client, then paused to think about what he had said before grinning. Actually, it'll be on Naruto and Gaara. If Yamato hadn't looked at them, the boys would have expressed their displeasure as they stared at their sensei. They scowled and stared at the floor, but they hadn't rebutted Yamato's assertion. Jiraiya nodded after giving the boys a close look. Sounds good. Where to? After a meal with his team and the pervert, Naruto sighed, mentally exhausted. He had to eat the entire meal next to the obnoxious old pervert and act well, in a way. But the idea is what matters. Although he wasn't particularly awful, the old man had no trouble getting under the blonde's skin. And he had the strangest impression of him, as though he knew him well or something. However, he had no memory of the Sannin, so he could not possibly have known him. He mumbled to himself, then again, while gazing up at the clear night sky. I don't really remember the last 4 years of my life, either. Maybe I did know him. When his name was abruptly called, Naruto jumped and turned to see Hinata standing right at the edge of the clearing he had just entered. Naruto? He asked. He frowned slightly as she appeared a little uneasy. Perhaps she didn't want to be by himself with him. He waved Hinata over, trying his hardest to smile. Yo. Without waiting to see if she would approach, he returned his attention to the stars above him. He didn't have to because he could hear her footsteps approaching shortly after. Naruto always felt a sense of calm when she was by his side, like a cozy blanket on a chilly night, and he was always afraid of how at ease he could become simply by being around her. Naruto? With lavender eyes searching for the answer, she said, What are you doing out here? She could see that he was thinking deeply even though his azure eyes were still fixed on the sky. Which was odd considering that she only posed a straightforward query. He looked at her and gave her a ghostly smile after what felt like an eternity. He chuckled briefly and said, I don't know. I just stared walking around the village and all of a sudden, I'm over here. Now it's my turn to ask what you're doing here. With her feet looking especially intriguing right now, Hinata flushed, pressed her index fingers together, and looked away. She paused to look him in the eyes once more and even managed to break her nervous habit. Well, I came looking, she said. She trailed off. I came looking for you. After Master Jiraiya thanked us, you disappeared and I was getting worried, her anxiety was starting to overwhelm her. Her fingers did what they do best, her blush deepened, and her eyes shifted downward. Naruto's heart pounded so forcefully against his chest that he feared it would explode if it did so once more. Her concern was for him. Then, in the pit of his stomach, the same unidentified emotions started to surface. She was less concerned about him than she had been when he was a teenager. She only cared about him because he resembled her, and she assumed that if he were to abruptly leave her life, the other Naruto would follow. As his body began to tremble, anger began to fuel it. Jealousy was the term he had heard used to describe this type of anger. Was he experiencing that right now? To be honest, he didn't care and wasn't sure. He was no one's plaything, no one's substitute. Damn it, he was Naruto Uzumaki, and he wouldn't let anyone, not even himself, take a backseat. And his anger vanished as fast as it had appeared. The mop of dark blue hair that had just pushed itself up against his chest caught his attention. Hinata allowed herself to rely on the teenager she admired while keeping her hands close to her chest. Tears trickled down her eyes, and her shoulders trembled. She could still clearly recall the day the old Naruto returned. She recalled how delighted she was that he had escaped the 1 and 7 tailed chakra beast's devastating attack. She hadn't lost him so early in life and in their ninja careers. Her days were still made brighter by the sun that still existed in her life. He didn't remember her, though. Like footprints left at the beach, the time spent with him washed up. There was no sign that it had ever existed before the wave came and swept it away. And it was painful to the core of her being. As if the final 4 years of her life had never occurred, she had endured the pain and continued to go on missions and practice exercises with him. Whether memories or not, she was only able to carry on with her ninja career because, to her, Naruto was still Naruto. His voice called out to her, Hinata, are you okay? But she felt as though she was in a box. She could hear him, but it was distant and muffled. Hinata's anxiety quickly increased after he had left without saying anything to anyone earlier that day. Her inability to see him made her irrationally afraid that she would never see him again and that all of her time and effort would be in vain. Additionally, she would be by herself, just as she had been prior to his demonic transformation. Like she was destined to be alone. Hinata. Naruto gave her the most gentle shake he could manage, but it wasn't very gentle. Even though he was in control of his newfound monstrous strength, there were times like these when he was as subtle and in control as a bull in a china shop. His roughness made her wince, and she looked up at him with wide eyes. She hadn't been aware that she had fallen into such a deep state of trance. She was also having trouble breathing. She was breathing so forcefully and strangely that it felt like her lungs were on fire. She was so uneasy that her body trembled violently as well. Naruto leaned her against his chest and held her as tightly as he could without suffocating the poor girl after realizing he had her attention. Her body tensed, but he chose to ignore it. He wasn't going to desert his friend and teammate when she most needed him, but perhaps she stiffened because she didn't like him being so close or something, and a hug was exactly what she needed. Hinata felt somewhat better after taking a few moments to control her anxiety and adjust her breathing. She raised her arms slowly, almost reluctantly, and wrapped them around Naruto's lower body. She sniffled a little, but otherwise remained relaxed and at ease. The unexpected statement, "I know you miss him," from Naruto startled Hinata. He looked up once more, as though pleading with a god for the right words. "And I bet being around me is hard, seeing as I look like him. Well, I was him, but," he said. Hinata cocked her head back just enough to catch a glimpse of his face. "Naruto, I know it's not the same, but," Naruto grinned at Hinata with the broadest, brightest smile he could manage. She turned red. He took a moment to process what he had said. "Even if he isn't here anymore, I am now," he said. "Is that enough?" she asked, searching his eyes for dishonesty or even cruel laughter, but was pleased to see none. Hinata prayed to whoever would listen that she wasn't dreaming as she slowly nodded her head. He chuckled for a moment. "Then that's good enough for me. Come on, we don't want to worry Gaara or Yamato. Sensei, do we? Besides, we need to get up early so we can go back home. I know I don't want to miss our old classmates become Chunin." Holding her hand, he guided her back to the hotel where they had spent the previous evening. Still a little drunk, Hinata allowed him to drag her all the way back to the hotel. "Come on Hinata. You don't want to sleep out here, do ya?" replied Naruto. After blinking, Hinata nodded and grinned. "Of course not, Naruto." Two pairs of eyes watched the young teen run away back in the clearing. The larger silhouette asked nervously, "Is it time now?" He shifted slightly, but otherwise stayed put. His companion let out a sigh. The larger of the two moaned, "Not yet. There are too many threats. Once they head out, then we'll strike." He left his warning hanging, mainly because he wasn't entirely sure himself. "Don't mess this up. We'll only have one shot at this. If he finds out we came too early," he said. "Whatever." Then, like a drop of water into a river, the two silhouettes vanished. The traveling group appeared to have adapted to the snowy environment quite well to the untrained eye. The group appeared unconcerned by their surroundings, wearing fur-lined jackets to protect them from the blustery, whip-like winds. Actually, the shortest person in the group shivered in his black jacket and yelled, "How much longer until we get out of this white hell hole?" Pulling his hood forward to protect his cheeks from the scorching winds, his left-hand companion snorted. The boy flinched at the cold, even though his sand helped him in an unnatural way by keeping out most of the wind and snow. A heated glare followed his statement. "Would you shut your mouth, Uzumaki? I'm not happy about this, either, but you don't see me acting stupid," he said, and yet he was unfazed. "Oh, that's it, Panda. You are going down." The lone female in the group positioned herself between Naruto and his target before he could deliver on his threat. In an attempt to soothe the blonde-haired whirlpool, she raised her mitten-covered hands. "Naruto, please, calm down. We're only half a day's travel from crossing into the land of fire. Please, be patient." As he considered what his friend had said, the blonde glared at his opponent. His anger subsided like a fire in the rain as his eyes met hers. His expression softened, and he nodded his head before turning to resume their journey. A loud voice yelled, "Way to go, princess," startling Naruto and Hinata. The voice went on, reining the boy in like the dog he is. "Good boy." Hinata blushed and looked at her hands as she twiddled her fingers together while Naruto muttered obscenities. Their new traveling companion had been temporarily forgotten. Naruto shot back, "Shove it down your wind pipe, pervy sage." Then he turned to Yamato, looking frustrated. And who invited this asshole, anyway? Yamato started to perspire. The wood. User reprimanded, language. And Naruto winced a little. His ghoulish face, which always put the Uzumaki in his place, followed his question with, and I invited Master Jiraiya along, because besides him needing to return to the village anyway, it is extra eyes to keep on the lookout from any threats. Is there a problem? Naruto shook his head like a charm and turned to face the front. With a smile, Yamato wished the boy would not speak again for the remainder of the day. Jiraiya simply observed the exchange with a wry smile, relieved to have someone on his side for once. Still, spending time with the blonde brat made him feel a little nostalgic. It evoked pleasant memories from earlier times, particularly from a certain red-headed menace who used to charm and frighten one of his former students. Continuing to watch his godson quietly, he saw that the young heiress looked more like his cherished pupil, while he behaved more like his mother. The old Sannin couldn't contain the burst of laughter that escaped his lips. Without noticing the group halting in front of him, Jiraiya blinked and said, "Ew, why are you looking at us with that creepy grin?" Naruto was standing protectively in front of Hinata, with the girl partially concealed behind her shield. "Pervert. We're barely into our teens." A vein was on the verge of bursting from Jiraiya's forehead when he growled, "Excuse me?" Before the boy even realized he was his godson, Jiraiya was going to murder him. "I don't swing that way, and Hinata isn't into creepy old geezers who still think they're young but they're really just ancient fossils." The Sannin's hand twitched as he fought the impulse to push a Rasengan into a shadowed area. "Oh, and what would you know about what the Hyuga heiress is and is not into?" Blinking, Naruto said, "Well, it's because, and so I thought." Notwithstanding his rambling incoherence, Naruto's blush grew darker by the second. As Hinata attempted to interpret Naruto's tirade, she was not far behind him in terms of color. After an awkward and agonizing silence, Naruto finally gestured to the white-haired shinobi. "It doesn't matter what exactly Nada is or isn't into, because no one is into old perverted creeps like you." The only things Yamato and Gaara could do were sigh and shake their heads in frustration. Jiraiya quickly lifted the genin by the front of his shirt before Naruto could react. Now that they were facing each other, Naruto realized how powerful and menacing the enraged giant could be. With his best glare, Jiraiya snarled, "Keep calling me a creep or a pervert, and see what happens," to Naruto. The blonde's words were beginning to go beyond being annoying and straight into infuriating him, even though he didn't really care what they said. Regretfully, Jiraiya's remarks only made Naruto more defiant. He sneered and returned the man's glare with one of his own. "Fuck." Jiraiya spun around and punched Naruto into the air before anyone could stop him. After Hinata, Yamato, and Gaara blinked several times, Gaara formed the number 10 out of his sand over his head while wearing a contented smirk. A moment later, Hinata's thoughts jolted out of her reverie, and she started running toward Naruto. Yamato merely watched while attempting to relieve his headache. Yamato stated, "You know you have to go get him," with a firm tone. Jiraiya debated sending him after Naruto, but ultimately decided against it. He went a little too far with his punt, but he would never say it out loud. Overall, a slap to the head would have been less annoying and equally effective. Jiraiya muttered, "I'll go get him," sounding less like an adult and more like a reprimanded child. Where Yamato and Gaara witnessed Naruto and Hinata vanish, a vanquished Jiraiya marched solemnly toward them. Yamato was limited to shaking his head. His favorite male student shrugged sympathetically when he asked no one, "Why is it the oddest bunch of people always seem to find us?" Because of her bloodline ability, Hinata found her favorite blonde in no time at all. Now that she was close to him, she could see that he was fine except for being unconscious. Finally being able to see Naruto without using her Byakugan made her anxiety start to fade. She knelt next to him and brushed the snow from his face and hair while raising his head out of the snow. Naruto appeared to be in a blissful sleep, even though he had been punted more than 100 meters away. Hinata found it strange, but she couldn't help but feel softer when she saw his serene face. When he looked like this, she had no desire to wake him up. "Hi, Nada, Hinata's already." Rosy cheeks turned a vivid red as she gasped at his abrupt statement. She was shocked, almost frightened, by how tender and loving his voice sounded. She would have struck the ground hard if she hadn't already been kneeling. She stared at the boy and muttered to herself, "Why?" before squeezing her eyes shut. As her heart rushed against her chest, her free hand moved slowly over it, seemingly in an attempt to calm it. "Why do you have this effect on me?" When he said, "Nada, she opened her eyes and stared at his lips. And all of a sudden, a picture from years ago came to her mind. A picture of Naruto over her, his lips lightly pressing against hers, when he was still learning to speak. Having decided it was just another of her crazy dreams, she had forgotten about that. Nevertheless, this dream has stuck with her more than any of her other dreams. Maybe it wasn't. Her lips were inches above his before she realized it. Startled by her own audacity, she gasped and paused. It was as obvious as the length of the days that the Hyuga wanted to kiss him. She needed to feel his lips on hers, not just wanted to. If there was one thing she could ever have, it would be a kiss from the boy she has long admired. Hinata's sanity was gradually being eroded by this need, but could she truly kiss him at this moment? Right now, when he was most exposed? Is that really that easy? Fighting back the tears that threatened to escape from their captivity, Hinata laid her forehead against his. She broke out of her struggle when she heard snow crunching beneath a boot. Her free hand went to her kunai pouch as she turned her head toward the sound. When she realized it was just her teammate, her body relaxed. He remarked, "You had not returned yet." Hinata raised an eyebrow at her alert teammate, saying, "I was starting to get worried." She never imagined hearing him say that. She started to say, "I'm sorry," but stopped to wipe away the tears that had escaped her eyes. She gently raised Naruto by moving his arm over her shoulder and said, "I was just making sure he was okay. It's nothing to be concerned about. Let's head back." Gaara took his side and stepped forward to assist her. They both shivered at the merciless cold as a sudden breeze swept over them. As Hinata watched Gaara attempt to protect his eyes from the cold with his hands, an idea suddenly came to her. "Gaara," she muttered, seemingly too scared to inquire. The teenager appeared perplexed by the question. "Where is your sand?" before nodding. In his usual monotone voice, he stated, "I'm conserving my chakra and energy because it's too cold for me to keep it active." After giving him one more look, Hinata nodded and grinned. She said convincingly, "Is.C, sorry to have bothered Y.U, and Gaara nodded. They advanced 2 more steps before Hinata collapsed to her knees and screamed in shock. Gaara winced as he struggled to balance under Naruto's weight. He turned to Hinata after reorienting himself. "Are you all right?" She gave a nod. When Gaara held out his free hand, she looked up and said, "I just got hit with a sudden fatigue." She took his hand and grinned at him. Gaara was about to say, "Let's be on our," when Hinata struck his chest with a chakra-powered palm. The redhead took a few steps backwards from the force of the blow and the chakra that was released into his chest. Hinata's suspicions were confirmed when she caught Naruto before he fell and saw Gaara launch into a murder of crows. But as the crows approached, she shielded her face with her free arm and closed her eyes. Her eyes met the notorious Sharingan eyes when she opened them again. She only had to make eye contact for a single second for the genjutsu to grab hold of her and knock her out. Naruto, in the silence of the forest came the low murmurs of a man who was furious. Amidst the snow-covered trees and vegetation, an animal would emerge and quickly run away upon recognizing the source of the gentle sound. Jiraiya had no desire to deal with his godson and the misery he was causing him at the moment. Not that he punched the little shit for giggles and shits. The blonde menace was making a concerted effort to irritate the living daylights out of the Sannin. "Well, mission accomplished, brat," he swore, disregarding the fact that his breath was visible. He cupped his hands in front of his mouth and blew into them to slightly warm them. After giving the idea of perhaps apologizing to the turd some more thought, he burst out laughing. His laughter lasted for a second more before it gradually subsided and he at last became aware of something. For a moment, he halted his journey to look around. Jiraiya briefly believed he had detected an unusual silence in the space. Furthermore, he could have been certain that he was the target of a covert bloodlust. He shook his head and continued, hoping the gut instinct was a result of last night's dinner. Jiraiya was suddenly approached from behind, and as he turned to look, a wrapped-up Zanbato descended and slashed him in 2. Causing his eyes to widen in shock. His breath left him for the last time, and he coughed up blood. And Kisame Hoshigaki's fanged smirk was the final thing he saw before passing out. With silent dismay, Kisame observed the body of a renowned Sannin. He had anticipated a bit more of a fight from the man his partner had warned him about, even though he was strong and his blade was nothing to laugh at. Actually, neither he nor the Uchiha believed he would kill him. All he was to do was take up the old man's time so that Itachi could gather the 9 tails. It nearly made the half-shark man feel bad for taking him out so quickly. Before assisting Itachi in tending to the wood user and the red-haired brat, he spat on his corpse. Yamato sat and ate one of his ration bars, which he was reserving for later, with a sigh. Every time he had to wait for someone, he would munch on something. During his time in Anbu, He nearly always teamed up with Kakashi, so he was surprised that he wasn't as big as an Akamichi. He saw that Gaara, who had gotten his secret cookie stash from somewhere on his person, was also eating. The wood user was somewhat surprised by how calm the day was. Although it wasn't unpleasant, it wasn't what was anticipated. Missions with his blonde headache always ended up being more difficult and annoying than they needed to be, for some reason. A huge ball of fire shot out from the tree canopy not far from where Yamato was sitting, as if to confirm his assertion. After blinking at the approaching attack, Yamato let out a sigh and wished that, for once, he and his team could set out on a simple mission and have it remain that way. The explosion that followed melted the snow and surrounded the area with debris and steam. The steam cloud was watched with crimson eyes, waiting for any kind of retaliation. Something snaked its way around both of his ankles, and he flinched. He glanced down and arched an eyebrow at the wood on his left ankle and the sand clutching his right. Sand rushed at him from every side and covered his body like a casket before he could resist the individual grips. His targets soon confronted him, but his head stayed out of the sand. Yamato said threateningly, "Itachi Uchiha, to what do I owe this displeasure?" He had no idea that the man who had killed a whole clan in a single night would be his assailant. This awful, very poor. He waited calmly, genuinely interested in the psychopath's response. However, there was something about the man's serene manner that alarmed Yamato. There was a problem. Once more, life provided him with the solution in the form of a giant man using his Zanbato to tear his student in two. Itachi exploded, sending Yamato flying away before the Leaf Village shinobi could curse. He lost his breath when his back struck an immobile tree. His world started to spin, and he was on the verge of losing his left ear's ability to hear. He felt a faint hand grab the front of his shirt and pull him up off the floor. When he opened his right eye, he saw that Kisame had lifted him off the ground. The voice was slow and amused as it taunted Yamato, saying, "You leaf ninja are truly pathetic. I thought I was going to have a grand old time with a real Jonin, but it seems you are no stronger than the genin you were put in charge of." The man with the brown hair gave him a sneer and raised his hands in a hand gesture. "Ah!" Kisami's sword struck his hands violently, shattering the wrist bones. Yamato could not stop the groan that escaped his throat, but he refused to give the man the satisfaction of hearing him yell. Nevertheless, it was sufficient to make the ill man smile again. As Yamato breathed heavily, he said, "It's a shame that I couldn't properly entertain you both," which confused Kisame. His bewilderment was short-lived, as Yamato disintegrated and transformed into a wood clone. When Kisame turned to see how the genin he had cut in half was doing, he saw nothing but a heap of sand and snarled. "Tch," he said, shifting his blade over his shoulder as he burst out laughing. "Well, so he does have a bit of fight in him." Certain that his partner already had their target in his grasp, he swung his blade over his right shoulder and set out to find Itachi. She heard someone shout, "Ada," from meters away. It sounded almost like she was inside a house with a yelling voice outside. Before long, she felt hands snatch her arms and shake her, causing her eyes to pop open. It was initially blurry, but after it cleared, she saw her squad leader's anxious gaze. His face lit up with relief as he watched her awaken. "Not time to explain, we need to go." With the girl in his arms, he raised her and leapt to the branches of the tree above. Hinata flushed, but she forced herself to hide her shame so she could get information. It appeared to her that Yamato was fleeing from something. She remembered the imposter when she caught a glimpse of Gaara's red hair and... "Why? Yamato. Sensei. Where's..." she interrupted when she noticed the man muttering obscenities. Shortly after, he said, "I was about to ask you the same thing." After a few moments of running, he stopped, and the two men quickly caught their breath. Hinata kept a close eye on Yamato's anxious expression, managing to hide it well. Gaara was also concerned, but he was too preoccupied to express it clearly. "Yeah, Yamato. Sensei," she said, waiting to get his undivided focus. Yamato didn't respond to her question. What are we going to do? Because he hadn't decided yet. Do they need to find Naruto? Should he search for his genin and send him back? In any case, why were two missing nin pursuing them? A tiny toad hopped on top of Yamato's head before he could think of anything to say. When the Jonin saw the note on the toad's back, they grabbed it. He nodded and turned to face his team after quickly reading it. With his students following closely behind, he turned and took off, saying, "We have no time to waste, come on. We're going to find Jiraiya and then, we'll find Naruto." "What about the Uchiha?" Gaara inquired, causing Hinata to gasp at the name. She felt a chill run down her spine as she visualized the Sharingan slowly spinning. "No need to worry, according to Master Jiraiya, he and Kisame Hoshigaki have retreated." Uncertain of herself, Gaara muttered, "That's good." Yamato gave a headshake. "No, not good. They have something we want." Hinata's blood froze at his words. Everything came together gradually, and she gasped in horror. No, Yamato nodded as his head swiveled to face Hinata, but... Hinata looked down but nodded, saying, "Now is not the time to talk. We need to catch up to Master Jiraiya before it's too late." When she looked up to see Gaara nodding his head, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Hinata smiled at his attempt, even though it wasn't exactly what she wanted to hear. "Everything will be fine. If he can get hit with one of the strongest attacks in the world and survive, he'll get out of this one too," she said. Naruto was unsure of his location. He didn't even know where he had been for the past 4 years, so it wasn't like that was a novel situation. In any case, he always figured it out, and he wasn't going to let something as trivial as that stop him from learning the answer. When he opened his eyes, he saw a dimly lit sewer hallway with water a foot off the floor. He stood up and looked around, but he didn't see anything noteworthy. In search of someone who could respond to some of his inquiries, he started to move down the corridor. After what seemed like miles of walking, he still didn't see anyone who could assist him. Nevertheless, he persisted in his search for at least the exit. Against his better judgment, he followed the sound until it led him into a huge room, but he froze when he heard the soft breathing of something. The only wall in the room was the doorway behind him, and the ceiling seemed to go on forever. He still saw something that made him want to flee farther into the room. Naruto never imagined he would see the person lying in the center of the room. "Oh no, is that me?" It did resemble Naruto, but there were some significant differences. Specifically, 9 fluffy tails and 2 fox ears. The sleeping Naruto awoke, his right eye opening to reveal its black sclera and crimson iris, as though he had heard his thought. His face broke into a hideous grin, revealing to Naruto the acerbic nature of his teeth. As Fox Naruto stood up and cracked its shoulders, the sound reverberated throughout the spacious room, and Naruto stepped back. "At last, we meet, Naruto," the demon uttered softly. Incredulous, Naruto simply shook his head. "This can't be real." "Oh, but I am very much real," was the other Naruto's response. He started walking toward Naruto. Slowly but surely. Naruto simply continued to retreat until his back struck the wall. Panicked, he turned to see that his only means of escape had vanished. He gasped as he was over the demonic Naruto, like a predator over its victim. Who are you? You can't be me. I'm me." The other Naruto merely chuckled before choking him by snatching him by the throat and raising him off the ground. Fox Naruto pulled Naruto in closer, his smile growing. "Oh, but that's not true. I am the things you hate. The things that you've shunned," he said. "I am the real you." For the benefit of the village, Itachi Uchiha had long since killed off his heart. He would comply with the Akatsuki's request as long as it did not have an adverse effect on his home village. He therefore knew he had to seize the ideal chance to capture the 9 tails from the Hidden Leaf village without entering that village. He could not face his younger brother again or jeopardize their military force. If he could avoid it, he did not want to see the younger Uchiha. His captive, who had been unconscious since his capture so many hours prior, was the object of his onyx eyes. The Uchiha found it strange, but he was happy with the silence because he didn't want to scrutinize a gift. He didn't dislike the boy. In fact, he might have liked him in a different life. But this boy had to be killed by the demon's extraction for the sake of the greater good. He would do it all over again in a heartbeat if it meant keeping his brother safe. He heard his partner yell, "So, Itachi, that seemed a little too easy, didn't it?" The Sharkman smirked slyly. Itachi didn't feel like playing word games with the Kiri native, so he just looked at him. However, that only served to agitate the untamed shinobi. "What's wrong? Having second thoughts about turning in a boy from your old village?" Not necessarily false. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and Kisami's low laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. I have no feelings for that village, or anyone from there, for that matter," Kisame said. "The closest hiding place is just a day and a half's drive away. Next, get in touch with leader and inform him of the circumstances. And it will take 3 more days to get the 9 tails out of this boy, assuming everyone is free." Itachi eyed the boy again and shook his head, saying, "At best, we're looking at just under a week to get this done. It was necessary. Now it won't be long." By the time Hinata and her group made their camp, night had fallen. They quickly built a fire, and Yamato constructed a little shelter for himself and each of his students. Gaara had caught rabbits for their supper as well. While the meat cooked over the flame, the 3 of them waited patiently. Because she was thinking about Naruto, Hinata was not in the mood to talk. She was reminded of a moment when Naruto's tails were moving idly as they unwinded after the academy by the fire's idle sway. A voice abruptly called out, "So, what are we waiting for?" drawing everyone's focus to the person behind Hinata. She turned to see Jiraiya grinning and eeped in surprise. Yamato merely grinned. "Master Jiraiya, you're late." Jiraiya merely gave him a sheepish back rub. Placing his hand down, he said, "Well, faking your death takes a lot more time than you'd think," and moved to stand between Hinata and Gaara. "But we haven't much time to waste, the fact that they came for Naruto so early." Jiraiya looked at Hinata and said, Master Jiraiya. What exactly are we dealing with? And why did they come after Naruto?" Jiraiya let out a sigh. "Well, the fact that his status as the Nine Tails is common knowledge makes this whole explanation easier." In an attempt to get a sweat drop from the Sannin, Gaara said, "So, they're after the power of the Nine Tails?" "Well, yes." Gaara nodded and folded his arms across his chest. "So, am I correct to assume that there is a group out there dedicated to collecting the powers of all the tailed beasts?" With a deadpan expression on his face, Jiraiya blinked. "Yo, Brad, I'm going to need you to stop doing that. Besides, how did you?" They both wore a black cloak with red clouds. Unless they're as crazy as that one Jonin from the Leaf who has a carbon copy running around in the same outfit, I doubt they'd wear the same cloak out of their own sense of fashion. There was no suitable way to respond to what he said. Even Hinata was ashamed that Jiraiya didn't have a witty comment at her fingertips. As though to challenge him, Gaara simply eyed the Sannin. Jiraiya muttered, "I don't mind punting you." While his sand rose up behind him and moved languidly around him, Gaara simply arched an eyebrow. "Bring it on, old man." "Enough," yelled Yamato. He observed the responses of the other men in the group and was relieved that neither of them was willing to irritate him further than they had already done. "I'm tired of seeing you children argue. The fact remains that we need to decide what we do next." He turned to face the group's oldest member. "Master Jiraiya, what exactly does this group want with the power of the tailed beasts?" Gaara muttered under his breath, "World domination." But Yamato's reprimanding glare cut him off in his tracks. Jiraiya also glared at the boy until he thought he wouldn't stop him. "My sources haven't confirmed what the exact goal of the group is. The only thing they can come up with is that they plan to change the world to fit their ideals and that they have about 8 members, Jiraiya said with a sigh. "Whoever is leading this group knows how to keep his head down. It took me months just to find out their name." "So, what is their name?" "Akatsuki." They weren't particularly frightened by the name, but they had all seen a hint of the authority that some of their members possessed. And to have additional people of the same quality? It was frightening. Hinata questioned, almost fearing the answer, what do they plan on doing with Naruto? What happens to him once they use him? He looked down at his hands and said solemnly, "I don't know. My spy network is currently working on finding out everything they can about the Akatsuki. However, I don't see them keeping Naruto alive for long," detesting the sense of powerlessness that overcame him. Not having the strength to look at anyone right now, Hinata forced herself to look away from Jiraiya while fighting back the tears. Gaara just gave Jiraiya a glare. He reprimanded, "Good going," but Jiraiya was too preoccupied pointing out his own errors to notice his sarcastic remark. Unaware that his partner had already crept up on him and taken his godson from under his nose, he had hoped that deceiving the Hoshigaki would help him find his goal. The 2 renegade ninja had fled by the time he recognized who he was facing. Fortunately, a toad was following them and updating him every 30 minutes. Jiraiya observed the team's faces and was not surprised to see Yamato's mind racing to process the information and begin making decisions based on it. "They're not too far ahead of us. At most, it'd only take us an hour to make it to their camp. But we're dealing with 2 very powerful shinobi. One is the man who, in a single night, slaughtered the Uchiha clan down to 2 members. And the other was given the name Monster of the Hidden Mist for his immense strength, vicious bloodlust, and his Zanbato, which is appropriately named Samahata, or Sharkskin. These men are nothing to laugh at. They're bad news in every sense of the word." Jiraiya wasn't sure whether Gaara's lack of emotion was due to his lack of intelligence or a sense of duty to his teammate. However, the girl was trembling. Yamato saw that the girl was trembling and said, "Hinata, are you all right?" There was a pause, and then she shook her head. "It's not fair," she exclaimed, startling her male friends. She looked up, tears in her eyes, her cheeks flushed. Why does bad things always happen to him? Why can't Naruto live a happy, normal life? She asked herself. "We have to save him," she exclaimed, getting up and running away faster than anyone had anticipated. Gaara got up to follow her, but Yamato put a hand on his shoulder to stop him. He gave a headshake. Let her be alone for a while. She doesn't even know where Naruto is. She'll be back. Even though Gaara disliked leaving his teammate alone, especially after one had just been abducted, he chose to do as Yamato advised and took a seat again. Naruto fought against the hand that was tightly gripping his throat, struggling to breathe. He attempted to kick his malevolent twin, but the teenager was always aware of when he would do so and steered clear of it like a child. As he watched his weaker twin slowly perish at his hands, Dark Naruto laughed. It would have been too good to be true. I've been waiting years for this. For a while, I thought I'd have to trick your other, stupider half in order for me to take back my body. But with Gaara's help, I was able to take over his power with ease. And now you fall into my lap as well? Oh boy, somebody upstairs must really love me. He chided, increasing the strength of his grasp. Dark Naruto laughed once more and said, you can feel it, can't you? Your strength, your life gradually leaving you? And mine getting stronger by the second? Naruto strained to say, if you hadn't noticed, before continuing. Dark Naruto sneered at him and threw him violently to the side, saying, I'm being choked to death, so I can't really tell whether it's because you're choking me or because you're absorbing my life force. Dark Naruto approached him and said, smart ass until the very end, huh? He was shocked when Naruto turned and punched him in the face after he stood over him and watched him struggle to stand. As his punch failed to injure his opponent, Naruto watched in horror until the very end. Huh? In return, Dark Naruto cocked his fist back and even laughed. The blow caused Naruto to spin, retreating several steps before hitting the ground. Damn it. Face it, Naruto. I'm going to take over this body, and you'll rot away in a cell until you cease to exist. Then you'll see how it feels. Making the proper hand gestures, Naruto exclaimed, not going to happen. Shadow clone jutsu. However, nothing occurred, and no clones materialized from a cloud of smoke. What the? The teenager spit up and clutched his stomach in agony after Dark Naruto kicked him in the stomach. Take the hint. Accept your fate and sit in the corner to die. In his sleep, Kisame observed the blonde target moving erratically. While Itachi slept, it was his turn to stand guard. Only 2 more hours remained until morning, at which point they would proceed to the hiding place. Kisame believed that tearing off the teen's arms and legs would make carrying him easier because he would weigh less and have a lower chance of escaping. He wouldn't be able to escape from 2 S-class ninjas, whether or not they were 9. Tails. He had to laugh at Itachi's tenderness because he would be held entirely responsible if the boy were to escape in the end. The teenager muttered, no, while he slept. At that, Kisame arched an eyebrow. Get away. Standing over the shackled blonde, Kisame watched him struggle in his restraints, his face twisted into a look of pain and terror. Kisame's face nearly lit up with joy. And if his whining hadn't been so annoying, it would have. I'm not a monster, like you, Kisame reprimanded Naruto, shut up, while kicking him in the left flank. Kisame was over him once more after he rolled a little farther away. The teenager continued to ride, but as the seconds went by, his cries became louder and more frantic. He screamed, get away, and attempted to worm his way out of a non-existent phantom. Kisame started to stomp on Naruto's sides and torso, shouting, I'm getting tired of your whining. Shut your mouth. After waking up to the shouting of Naruto and Kisame, Itachi chose not to step in because Naruto couldn't escape Kisame and Kisame wasn't foolish enough to accidentally kill the teenager. I said, shut up. Naruto's right eye snapped open before the next blow could hit him, and he vanished like a strand of smoke in the wind. Kisame blinked and glanced up in time to see Naruto spinning in midair before kicking the Kiri native in the face and knocking him off his feet with his right leg extended. The Sharkman struck a tree so forcefully that its roots came loose and fell to the ground. After spinning for a moment, he moaned and then straightened up while muttering curses. The air temperature abruptly increased by a few degrees, and the area was brightly lit. It even reached a point where Kisame became blind from the intensity of the light source. He was shocked to see the blonde brat standing exactly where he had been when his vision returned, but there was something strange about him. The sclera of his red eyes was as dark as the night. The sudden sense of death and hatred that was washing over him in waves was accompanied by a menacing smile. Finally, 2 golden fox ears perked up at every sound he heard, and 9 golden tails swayed hypnotically behind him. Kisame himself would have been afraid to be around the teenager if he weren't such a monster. As it was, he only experienced a sense of relief at being able to, in a sense, finally stretch his legs. Kisame laughed and went to get Samahata. He was about to grab the handle of his Zanbato when Naruto suddenly materialized in front of him. With his right hand covered in a dark crimson fire, He struck him in the face and knocked him off his feet several meters away. "Let's get this party straight." The fishman roared so loudly that it shook the ground beneath him, and Naruto laughed as he watched him take off. Sitting on the sidelines, Itachi had assessed his target and observed as it launched Kisame into the air, not just once, but twice already. It was time to strike now that he had his guards down. The threat was about to be struck down by the Uchiha, but Naruto turned his head, grinned, and vanished from Itachi's view. Itachi barely avoided being burned alive by a massive fireball after his instincts told him to move. And as fast as it had gone, the silence was back, and the only sounds in the immediate vicinity were the cackle of the fire and Itachi's panting. Itachi looked around with his Sharingan, anticipating the Jinchuriki would come at any moment. He could feel the evil aura crashing against him like waves on the beach, so at least his was close. Itachi went to fetch his partner, who was still recovering from Naruto's blow, after he was certain the blonde menace wouldn't attack. Hinata had given up running a long time ago. Whether she cared or not, she didn't consider where she ran. She just wanted some time to reflect on what was happening in the peaceful silence of the forest. Unfortunately, she was only able to imagine horrible things happening to Naruto. Evil men torturing and questioning him about something he couldn't control. She tried to stop the tears from falling, but it was no more possible than stopping the snow. All she wanted was to be able to do something more than wait. The fact that she couldn't simply activate her Byakugan and go look for him was frustrating. She didn't even know which way he was going, so she knew that would be a waste of time and chakra. She was suddenly overcome with a sense of dread and collapsed to her knees. She had never experienced such a wave of evil and hatred since Naruto's initial fusion with the Nine Tails. Her eyes widened in shock at that thought. She has previously sensed this presence. It's Naruto. In order to find him, Hinata turned on her Byakugan and started to look in the direction from which she sensed the aura emanating. She was running before she even knew it. Her heart pounded against her chest, ready to explode at any moment. Even though the snow was cooling her body, she was starting to perspire. She didn't care that her lungs were beginning to feel like they were on fire. She would still attempt to run to him even if her legs were broken. She would not settle for anything less than to see for herself that he was all right. Finding Naruto didn't take long. He was running directly toward her, and she could see it. Although he was moving too quickly for her to see him clearly, she could make out the ears and long, golden tails in the distance. He was encircled by green flames as well, and his shirt was entirely gone. She blushed at this, but the blonde maelstrom skidded to a stop 3 meters ahead of her, leaving her without time to consider it further. His tails wavered placidly as he embraced her, his fire fading until the moonlight was the only source of illumination. Tears threatened to fall from her eyes as she gazed at him, but a smile quickly appeared on her lips. She could no longer contain her tears and cocked her head slightly to the side. Missing the perplexed expression on his face, she wiped the tears from her eyes with her sleeve and said, "Naruto, I'm so happy you're okay." When she raised her head again, Naruto was standing right in front of her, his hand raised and stroking her cheek. Like a Christmas tree, Hinata's face glowed. She couldn't believe he was so near her. Naruto? She asked. He was petting her cheek, but why? His sclera was black, but she was too agitated to notice it. The seconds that passed made the girl in front of him even more intriguing, so he hummed to himself. Then it finally struck him, like a match. "You," he said, his voice tinted with perverted glee. "I know you, you're the girl." Hinata's delicate eyebrow went up. "The girl?" Naruto gave a head nod. He sounded a crazy laugh that made Hinata shudder. "Yes, the girl. You give this fool so much strength and love. In fact, his struggling has increased ever since I took in your scent. Not that it matters, now that I've completely taken over," he said. Reaching for his hand, she pushed it away from her face. With concern, she said, "Naruto, what's wrong with you? Taken who over?" As though she had just insulted him, Naruto watched her carefully as she moved his hand. With a sneer on his face, he gave Hinata a hard shove that knocked her on her ass. She looked up in disbelief, but Naruto ignored her face. He yelled, "The fool," as though it were the most apparent thing in the world. Hinata said, "The Naruto you knew, both of them will soon be gone," and scurried back to give them some distance. Naruto, however, didn't care. He followed her pace exactly. He even smirked as he followed her, even getting down on all fours. He paused before grabbing her by the left ankle and pulling her until she was fully beneath him. "The boy you knew will soon be gone," he said. "And you will help me do it." Hinata felt like an apex predator had captured her. She could not get away even if she wanted to, because his steely crimson eyes held her in place. "How would I do that?" He smirked at what she said. He didn't stop until his lips were right next to her right ear, bringing his face agonizingly close to hers. As he spoke, she could almost feel his breath on her skin. "By dying for me, Ga." A splashing sound reverberated throughout the deserted room. "Why won't you die?" Naruto roared. "Bite me," and got back up. His sense of smell was suddenly struck by an aroma, and he nearly bit the bullet. Naruto was the first to identify who owned it, even though they had both smelled it simultaneously. Naruto was terrified when he realized that this madman was controlling his body. How would he respond to Hinata in this version of himself? Would he murder her? Never would he accept it. He needed to take action. Tired of the rebellion the idiot in front of him was giving him, crimson eyes narrowed. Azure orbs linked to their counterparts with a steely resolve. As long as my friends are in danger," they said. Dark Naruto snarled before a thought occurred to him. When Dark Naruto vanished, Naruto attempted to strike him, but was unsuccessful. "You won't ever beat me." Turning to the voice, Naruto asked, "So, she's your strength?" He noticed Dark Naruto grinning, his laugh betraying his cunning. Dark Naruto turned his back and said, "Well, Naruto, I guess our fight will have to wait." His eyes suddenly averted as though he was thinking deeply. Naruto clenched his fist at this point. Naruto rushed to his doppelganger and attempted to end it with a single blow, but was startled when his tails wrapped around each of his limbs, holding him in place. "Don't turn your back on me, coward," Naruto exclaimed. Dark Naruto laughed when he suddenly regained his ability to see with his physical eyes. "Patience, fool. Sit back and enjoy the view," he said. When he saw his own clawed hand ready to strike down the blue-haired teen in front of him, he wished he had not. Staring intently into his own eyes, or rather, the Dark Naruto's, Hinata had not yet noticed his hand. As he walked toward the evil chakra that had just materialized, his heart was beating as quickly as his legs. A tiny tremor that rocked the ground beneath him and his friends followed it. Until he heard the youngest member shout out his godson's name. He was initially unsure of the source. He finally realized it at that point, and shouting out his name was the only thing he could do. Jiraiya outpaced the two who were having difficulty keeping up with him. He had to make sure Naruto was alright because he couldn't wait for them, and if he didn't do something, he wouldn't be able to face his student and his wife in the afterlife. Furthermore, he was certain that the young Hyuga had also pursued him, endangering her life. He needed to take action quickly. When Gaara's voice reached his right ear, Jiraiya gave a little start. "Catch up, pervy." "Sage," he said. The redhead was flying on a cloud of sand when he looked, which startled him. Gaara smirked slightly as he sped past Jiraiya and disappeared from view. "Hey." Yamato merely shook his head while observing Jiraiya's attempt to overtake his pupil. "Why can't my life be normal?" Gaara appeared in the clearing where the evil chakra was coming from in no time at all on his flying cloud. When he noticed a timid Hinata beneath a ferocious-looking Naruto, his eyes narrowed. Alarms went off in Gaara's mind when she saw the sneer on his face and the insane expression in his eyes. Gaara then moved to stop his teammate when he noticed the demon teen raising his hand to stab her. "Naruto, this isn't you." Hinata swerved Naruto's jab as he thrust it forward with unexpected speed. Hinata pushed him away from her with a fluid motion, tucking her legs beneath his torso. After a backflip, he landed, allowing Hinata to leap to her feet and land in the gentle fist position. Her sights were fixed on the teenager before her as her Byakugan came to life. She shook her head when she caught a glimpse of Gaara off to the side. Dark Naruto said, "I told you." Naruto is gone, with his teeth ground. Surprised that Hinata would strike him with her gentle fist, he had his left hand cradling his side. The subtle accumulation of chakra at the bottom of her feet had gone unnoticed by him. He most likely would have taken the blow to his solar plex rather than his side if it weren't for his quick reflexes. He would undoubtedly have been paralyzed for some time. It would only take a minute to heal him as he was now. "You say that, but when I look into your eyes, I still see Naruto in there." Her gaze softened. "Naruto, please, come back to us." Shut up and die." Naruto sprinted in her direction, disregarding his injuries, his tail swishing nervously as he punched her. He followed it with a tail swipe, but Hinata jumped back after parrying his attack. He was fighting exactly as he did when he was in control of his demon side, as she had assumed. "I don't know what's going on, but I can help you." "We can help," she went on, hoping to convince her Naruto to return. "You don't have to do this, Naruto." Naruto snarled and moved a hand over his head. Naruto's tails all pointed to his mouth, which he used to create his Biju bomb, and he said, "You're really starting to get on my nerves, girl." That caused Hinata's eyes to widen, and before she could react, Naruto let go of his blow. He knew he had to leave her because she was starting to make him feel strange, so he didn't wait to find out if he had killed her. Assuming she hadn't been killed by his attack, he would return and kill Naruto once he had greater mental and physical control over her. Dark Naruto observed with gratification as Naruto hung his head, concealing his eyes with his bangs. He added insult to injury with a laugh. As I told you, it's pointless to fight me. Your dream girl is gone now. Nobody could have survived that, he said. When Naruto looked up, the resolve in his cerulean eyes startled Dark Naruto. Naruto's eyes narrowed. You better hope I don't get free because if I do, he said. Dark Naruto could sense the team's hatred even though he hadn't raised his voice or used venom in his speech. I'm going to kill you. Dark Naruto just continued to laugh. That's it, Naruto, Dark Naruto said, slamming a jab into Naruto's abdomen. Hate me. Feed me, he exclaimed with laughter as he persisted in attacking Naruto, striking his stomach, chest, and face. Dark Naruto was unrelenting, hitting Naruto mercilessly while preventing the teenager from retaliating. Dark Naruto continued his insane laughter while continuing to beat him. After he said, "Tell me when you're ready to give up, I can do this all day," to Naruto, it seemed like hours passed. Naruto might have believed it if days had gone by. Dark Naruto never seemed to stop to rest, as if he ran on the air he breathes. Naruto was starting to feel the effects of it. Every punch that landed and every laugh that came out of his twin's mouth made him hate him more, even though he could feel his strength ebbing away. Dark Naruto grabbed the front of his shirt and his tails released him. Ah, good, I've broken your spirit, he said. The weight of Naruto's arms prevented him from defending himself, and they fell to his sides. Crimson eyes stared back at weary blue ones. Dark Naruto swung and drew back his fist, saying, "Time to die." Too exhausted to witness his own death, Naruto closed his eyes. An ethereal voice yelled, "Naruto," with such suddenness that it startled both Narutos. That voice, Naruto acknowledged it and thought. Dark Naruto's fist, which was inches from Naruto's forehead, shook as though it were being restrained. When Naruto heard the voice in the real world, he gasped in shock. In order to avoid any impending attack, he swiftly spun around. When he felt slender arms encircle his torso and a mop of midnight blue hair appear just outside his eyes widened. Hinata yelled, "Give him back," as she locked her arms together and closed her eyes to prevent him from running away. Naruto yelled, "Get away from me," and attempted to yank the girl away, but she persisted. "You can't keep him away from me," Naruto snapped back, "and what do you care, huh? You're afraid of me. You just want your old dog back. You can't stand the thought of me being in control because you're afraid I'd kill you. You're afraid I'd." When she said, "I care because I love you," the forest became eerily quiet. Uncertain if he had heard correctly, Naruto's eyes were wide. She asked in a way that Hinata herself found hard to believe. Somebody, loves me?" She was aware that she preferred him to everyone else. She did not doubt that she had a particular place in her heart for this teenager. However, even she was unaware of how much she had liked him. Even now, though, she was unable to doubt what she was saying. To put it mildly, the revelation was shocking. I do, she sobbed, clinging to him as though her life were on the line. With his body frozen like water in the dead of winter, Naruto was immobile. After that, Hinata was left with no choice but to fall with him as his legs abruptly failed him. She was taken aback and nearly let him fall, but she managed to catch herself and keep him off the ground. "Naruto," she exclaimed as she turned to face her beloved, who had fainted. When his forehead felt like an iron skillet over a flame, she quickly moved her hand to feel it after carefully lowering his body. She was able to say, "Why? You're burning up," before his whole body caught fire. His chakra erupted like a geyser from him, pushing her away. She was thrown rolling away until she nearly fainted when her back struck a tree. She struggled to stay conscious and was powerless to stop Naruto from screaming in agony. "Naruto," she thought as she struggled to stand, but her legs refused to move. "Naruto. What is going on?" yelled Dark Naruto, exasperated. Then his body began to pulse, a sensation growing in his abdomen. Dark Naruto declared, "What? No," and let the original drop to the ground like a bag of potatoes. As he battled an invisible phantom, Dark Naruto tossed and turned, struggling with himself, and Naruto watched in wonder. And a new entity separated from Dark Naruto before the two teenagers realized what had happened. The original Naruto, his darker half, and the new creature were now present in the room. Before igniting into flames, the new creature glowed a vivid orange. The light was so intense that both Narutos shielded their eyes from it. When the light subsided, they were shocked to see Demon Naruto standing in front of them, glaring at them both. Both Narutos appeared to be reprimanded by his own red eyes. He paused, observing the two Narutos. "Fox know what's going on," he said. Demon Naruto had his right arm through his chest before Dark Naruto realized what had happened, but Fox is no puppet. Dark Naruto said, "Fuck," and then he scattered like a shadow in the sun. Demon Naruto let his arm drop to his side again as he watched him vanish. He turned to look at the first Naruto. Naruto could only see Demon Naruto with his right eye because his left eye was closed due to a black eye. Naruto managed to grunt, "So, who the hell are you?" Demon Naruto studied the teenager on the ground instead of responding immediately. Demon Naruto finally said, "There, only one of us, that can stay," which surprised Naruto. Demon Naruto lifted Naruto up and placed him on his feet, saying, "Only one of us, make Nada happy." Demon Naruto stepped back, inhaled deeply, and sighed once Naruto was able to stand up on his own. His resolve hardened as he looked directly into Naruto's eyes once more. "So, it Fox, or Naruto?" Naruto was unsure of what he could say in this circumstance. The target of his jealousy was standing in front of him. This was the version of him that his teammates missed, and for some reason, he had felt nothing but the utmost disdain for him. When he was in the village, no one liked him, but now a real demon version of him had friends. Loved ones who had truly welcomed him despite the fact that he was the tailed beast's reincarnation, which had destroyed their house. How fair was that? Naruto's own eyes became stony. When the commotion around Naruto finally subsided, Hinata was left with nothing to do but cry and break down. She crawled to where Naruto lay after shifting her weary body. She observed that although his temperature had decreased while she was with him, his breathing appeared to be more difficult than normal. "Oh, Naruto!" Yamato exclaimed. Hinata, as he, Jiraiya, and Gaara materialized at the clearing's edge. "We need to get him to a hospital," yelled Hinata, turning her head to face the group. Without wasting any time, Jiraiya picked up his godson and hurried to the closest village in the hopes that their hospital would be sufficient to treat Naruto. After Naruto, Yamato picked up Hinata, and the rest of Team 7 departed. Hinata's body started to feel heavy as they ran, and she found it harder and harder to keep her eyes open. She prayed that Naruto would recover quickly before she passed out. Hinata had been gradually lulled into much needed sleep by the morning's calm. She was pleasantly surprised to discover that she and her teammates shared a room when she woke up, an hour after they had arrived at the hospital. Gaara, who appeared to be deep in contemplation, was also present in the room, sitting between their beds. When he said, "You're finally awake," the woman gasped. He shook his head, unable to control the smirk that took over his face. "How long?" He looked at his teammate and said, "Hard to say, but no longer than an hour," before getting up and moving toward the door. Hinata merely nodded, and Gaara departed without saying anything more. "I'll go inform Yamato Sensei of your recovery. He wants to know what happened back there." After watching him go, Hinata just kept staring at the door until she finally looked at the other person in the room. She nearly forgot that he had been screaming in agony like she had never heard him do before because he appeared so calm. Nearly. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and threw off the covers. She approached him and saw him turn to his side, now facing away from her. His tails were gone, and that was the first thing she noticed. She was glad to see he was alright, but she couldn't deny that she was a little disappointed. To allay her fears and have indisputable evidence that Naruto had returned, she wanted to get up and touch him. Yamato entered, followed by Jiraiya of the Sannin and her other teammate, but as fate would have it, it was not to be. Yamato said softly, "How are you feeling, Hinata?" Hinata grinned wearily. Jiraiya, who was sitting on the window sill in the back corner, smiled when she said, "I'm feeling well, all things considered." Yamato became serious and chose to support his pupil. "That's good to hear. Now, on to business," he said. "Please, tell me what happened back there." Hinata didn't take long to describe what happened before Naruto came back. Starting with his initial appearance in his demonic form, discussing his peculiar behavior, and concluding with his eventual acquisition of Naruto's body. She considered telling them that Naruto had referred to her as the girl from his dream, but she concluded that it wasn't important to share. Fortunately, no one had asked her about it, but her blush gave her away. They had to intervene when she started to tell them about Naruto throwing a Biju bomb at her. "He what?" Yamato felt his heart feel like it was going to explode. She managed to squeak out, "It's not that serious," but she was unable to support her claim with confidence. "Not that serious. Calm down, Yamato. Let the girl finish, Jiraiya said, gesturing for Hinata to go on. Thank you, Master Jiraiya. As I was saying, Naruto attacked me with a Biju bomb, but I quickly substituted with a log and hid behind a sturdy tree before it exploded. After that, I used my Byakugan to find him again and confronted him one last time. I think, she stopped and pondered her next sentence. Her sensei patiently awaited her next move. I think my words were beginning to reach Naruto, so this time, I held him down as I tried to speak to him. For a while, he resisted until. This time, Hinata was staring down at her hands that were still at her lap, and she was glowing like a campfire. At her odd gesture, the three males who were conscious blinked. This time, Jiraiya was starting to lose patience and asked, until what? Well, Hinata shook her head, her memory of the incident a little fuzzy. A sudden weight was lifted off Hinata's shoulders as she said, I told him how much he meant to me. Before I knew it, he collapsed, and his chakra exploded out of him. I crawled over to him when it died down, and it wasn't long after that, you three showed up. Hinata was relieved that the awkward moment was over and that they looked away from her. Before long, the two older men were deep in contemplation, processing all that the girl had just told them. They found everything extremely odd, but since this was Naruto, they had come to anticipate such things from the walking disaster. She told him how she felt, but Gaara wasn't sure what that meant. Had he made a confession? He gave it some more thought and then shook his head, no longer interested. Gaara said, so what now, sensei? Now that that's over with, we just wait for Naruto to wake up, and once he's able to move, we can head back to the village. The Hokage will definitely want to hear about all of this. The blonde was still unconscious when Hinata and Naruto were the only people left in the room. Hinata was unsure of how much longer she could endure being unable to communicate with Naruto. She felt as though she hadn't spoken to him in months, even though his kidnapping had only lasted a day. Her heart pounded in her chest at the joyful sound of his laughter, and she longed to hear it again. With a sigh, she stood up. It was only now that she realized how hungry she was. Perhaps someone could show her the way to the cafeteria. Since he had retrieved Kisame, Itachi had remained silent. His partner's decision to let their target escape infuriated him. He knew he ought to have gotten up to assist in controlling Naruto, but he had thought Kisami's physical prowess would be sufficient. What a stupid choice that had been. The childish tone in Kisami's voice was starting to irritate Itachi. Come on Itachi, I said I was sorry, she said. He had no desire to engage in pointless games with his foolish companion. You can't ignore me forever. Eventually, you'll have to talk to me again. To underline his threat, Itachi glared at him while spinning his Mangekyo Sharingan at dizzying speeds. Continue to annoy me, Kisame, and leader will be the least of your worries, she said. The half-fish-man, however, merely smiled at the amusement his partner's remarks provided Kisami's warped psyche. His laughter was quickly dashed when memories of his altercation with the brat of the nine tails arose. He was annoyed that he had let his guard down and been caught off guard like that. He would have been the brat without arms rather than the ass. Chewing Kisame, who was waiting if he had taken the little shit seriously. He put a hand to his cheek and rubbed it as a ghostly pain struck him. That punk wouldn't have stood a chance if I had grabbed Samahata sooner, he said. He had a good right kick, though, so he had to give it to Naruto. The two Akatsuki members vanished into the morning without a trace after saying, let us not waste any more time. Leader is waiting for us. As the Leaf Village team waited for their unconscious member to awaken, the day quickly gave way to night. Yamato and Gaara were growing irritated and eager to get out of there. In fact, Yamato had to prevent Gaara from storming into the room and slapping the teenager until he passed out. With her hands on her lap and her gaze fixed on them, Hinata sat on her bed. But her thoughts had strayed to thoughts of home, so she wasn't even listening to them. She briefly wondered how her friends were doing on their Chunin exams, but she concluded that if she gave it too much thought, she would only worry herself. She was confident they would pass without any problems because they were more than halfway done. Soon after, she turned to look at Naruto and saw that the blonde teenager was grinning slightly. Her cheeks turned a pale shade of pink, and a smile of her own appeared on her lips. The way he curled up in his covers and appeared to be content with his current location made him look adorable. Hinata was reminded of Naruto's appearance during their shared sleep. She missed the moments when she was closest to him, and her smile quickly turned into a laugh. Though Hinata had been a little aloof from him, they were now practically best friends. But no more, she would make sure to be friendlier and less aloof toward Naruto as soon as he recovered. After what transpired in the hidden waterfall village, she needed to move on. She had little control over the situation, and she was stronger than that. Hinata blinked and observed Naruto intently, questioning whether she had dreamed it. She sat on the edge of her bed and got up slowly. His head shook back and forth before he yawned loudly. Hinata could see that his eyes were moving beneath his lids as they scrunched up tightly. Her breath stuck in her throat, and she was afraid to move lest she wake up from a fantastic dream. His azure eyes slowly opened and stayed fixed on the ceiling, looking curiously at the white, tiled ceiling. Hinata thought he had muttered something about dark sewers, and a silly smile appeared. Before long, Hinata was starting to find the sight of him awake and the sound of his voice to be too much. With her hands clasped together at her chest, she stepped forward. It was a wheezy squeak as she said, "Naruto," her voice gone. Instead of turning his head, Naruto's eyes moved slightly to the left and widened for a brief moment before returning to his usual silly smile while keeping his eyes closed. "Nada." Naruto raised his arms in a hug request. His voice was hoarse, but it was the Naruto she knew. "I'm back." She took a tentative first step, then nearly jumped into his arms, barely thinking about what he had said. "Naruto," she exclaimed, pressing her face against his. He let out a sharp sigh, forcing the air from his lungs, but after gathering his thoughts, he embraced Hinata. His shirt began to perspire, but he chose to ignore it and focus on Hinata's aroma instead. "Naruto, I missed you." Naruto chuckled quietly. He said, "I did, too, Nada. But I'm back now, and I won't be going anywhere for a long time," which made Hinata happy. The blonde's chest was embraced by the brunette, who relished the warmth it provided to her heart. She attempted to bury herself deeper into Naruto in an attempt to escape, but strangely, something was beginning to tickle her nose. To her surprise, she caught a glimpse of the offending object. A golden tail with a white tip. Hinata stammered, "Nah. Nah. Nah. Nah," and pointed to the tail with a finger. As 8 more emerged from beneath the covers and started to tickle Hinata, Naruto roared. Although she suppressed them, her giggles soon surfaced. For Naruto, it was a welcome change from what he had been missing most. He finally stopped attacking Hinata's sides to give her a chance to rest and breathe because he was still a little exhausted. "I told you I was back, Nada, and my tails are no exception," he said. Hinata noticed that his fox ears had returned when she looked up at him after she was able to breathe normally again. Naruto felt his instincts rise as her gaze narrowed in on his hazy ears. He had the impression that their first meal was being watched by a predator. Now, Nada, don't do anything rash." When she had finished saying, "That's funny, coming from you, Naruto," Hinata struck. On the second floor of the hospital, an on-duty nurse was going about her daily business. She noticed that Naruto Uzumaki was next on her list. The boy would likely be allowed to leave after he woke up. It would just be a routine checkup. She arrived at his room quickly and took a moment to gather herself, exhausted from the events of the day. She heard a man say, "Wait, Nada, not so hard." She was relieved that her patient was awake and assumed that was his voice. Then she heard a giggle that was more feminine. The nurse had to restrain herself from misinterpreting that statement. "I'm not doing it hard. I'm doing it the way you've always liked it. They wouldn't be doing something like that because they were only 13, correct? Well, it's been a while since you last touched it, you know. It's a little more sensitive than you remember." Her cheeks began to flush, and she was powerless to stop it. Behind her, a voice said, "Well, hello little missy." The suddenness made her jump, but she refrained from squealing. When she turned around, Jiraiya was grinning eerily at her. "Is the brat awake?" As she recalled the conversation in the room, her blush deepened. Well," she said. "Please don't, Nada. I'll be all right, Naruto, I promise." "Nada, please. Stop, but why? Didn't you want this? At least, loosen your grip a bit." Jiraiya giggled back, and a perverted smile came to his face. "Naruto, atta boy." When Jiraiya said, "So that's what's going on," the nurse deadpanned. Gaara, who appeared across from Jiraiya and the nurse, said, "Why are you waiting at the door? Just go in." "Shish." Gaara raised a non-existent eyebrow as Jiraiya and the nurse placed their index finger to their lips. "Why?" The teen and the Sannin struggled after the Sannin's hand jerked up and closed the Jinchuriki's mouth. Under Hinata's delicate fingers, Naruto groaned. He had forgotten how skilled her hands were. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't resist Hinata's skillful hands. He was putty. As he rubbed the one spot that Hinata knew Naruto cherished, she simply grinned sweetly. Hinata had no trouble continuing her kneading without interruption, despite his ears twitching. The nurse watched with irritation as the 2 men in front of her carried on with their brief wrestling match, growing louder by the second. She harshly whispered, "You two are like little brats," but the two were unaffected. Approaching from behind Jiraiya and Gaara, Yamato exclaimed, "Hey guys, is Naruto up yet?" Yamato's attention was immediately drawn to the nurse's scowl. She grabbed Yamato and Jiraiya by the ears and said, "You three, can't you learn to be more considerate?" Jiraiya was gripping Gaara's foot while he dragged the redhead to the ground. The nurses found it amusing to see two adult men being disciplined like little kids. After a while, Naruto discovered his head resting on Hinata's lap while she ran her fingers through his hair. Even in his younger years, when they both relaxed in this way, he had never felt so at ease. He opened his eyes and glanced up, not astonished to see Hinata smiling with delight despite having her eyes closed. His eyes crinkled from his action as he laughed. He jolted Hinata out of her reverie with the words, "You look happy, you know." She blinked, then hid it behind a hand as she giggled. "I suppose I do," she told Naruto, gasping in shock as he pulled her hand down. Hinata turned a deep red, but her smile returned the favor. "Don't hide your smile, I like seeing it." Her expression became serious as a sudden thought occurred to her. Naruto. How did you get your memories back? As one of his tails started to stroke his chin thoughtfully, Naruto hummed. Hinata laughed at how foolish he was. "I don't exactly know," he said, pausing to think about what he would say next. He paused and smiled at Hinata, saying, "I just felt separated, you know. A part of me was in a dark place, and I couldn't find it, no matter how hard I looked. But I think, when you called out to me, the missing piece woke up and came back." His recounting made Hinata smile. "I'm glad you're back. Oh, what was that explosion of chakra?" Naruto turned his head away, seemingly searching the ceiling for the solution. Maybe it was from my fight with myself?" he asked. "For a while, I felt at odds with myself. Like, a part of me tried to be the dominate one and make the other submit. But, after blinking, Naruto turned to Hinata with interest and said, "I believe they ultimately chose to reconcile because they knew you wouldn't be pleased if I was fighting with myself. Does that make sense?" Hinata nodded after giggling again. "It does." Naruto grinned. He hugged Hinata with his tails and said, "Good, because it doesn't to me." He laughed when he felt Hinata rubbing her cheek against his tails. After observing her closely for some time, Naruto looked up, his heart bursting with joy. It felt good to return.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.